Welcome back to KTN Weekend Prime, the point of news. A question that we've been asking, that I asked on my Twitter handle, is: are you satisfied with the amount of rent that you are paying today? The hashtag, of course, is living for rent, and you can tweet me or Yvon Okwara on @Yvon Okwara, myself, of course, at John Allan Namu, or our KTN handle at KTN Kenya. Remember that hashtag. The discussion tonight, one that will affect you if you have a roof over your heads and are living in an urban area. Let me just quickly introduce my guest. Sitting to the extreme right there is Kevin Kihara. He is from Shelter Afrique, and he is with marketing and business development strategy. I don't know if I've got your title correct.
No, strategy, performance and market development.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Kevin. Right in the center, a person not unknown to KTN, Nancy Modoni from The Property Show. Of course, you also own a real estate firm, and we'll be getting into that in a short while. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Asante sana for having me.
Yeah, yet another person who is not unknown to us here at KTN, was part of the Standard Group family, business writer and economist Maurice Aron. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, the statistic that you see on our Super Bowl right now is perhaps the best place to start, because it speaks to a lot of what's going on here. 181,666. I was just doing this on a mortgage calculator right before the program, and that is at 10.9%. In terms of a mortgage, that's perhaps the best rate that's in the market right now, either being offered by Standard Chartered or Barclays Bank. I'm not sure, but this is for a 3-bedroom apartment in Kileleshwa. Do you think, Kevin, that this is justifiable with respect to, number one, the size of the house, and number two, market forces?
Thank you very much, John Allen. The justifiability of that price for an apartment in Kileleshwa is really a factor of many things. A factor of the land prices, a factor of the financing charges that go into this, the construction process, and ultimately location, which is the #1 rule in real estate, which is location, location, location. The further you go from the core of Nairobi, something we call in urban planning, there's a center of concentric development that goes from the core to the outside of the city. And therefore, the further you go from the core of the city to the outside of Nairobi, the cheaper the price of land, and therefore the cheaper the cost of the particular housing unit that you'd acquire, or the piece of land that you can purchase. With Kileleshwa being in the core, therefore, with that scarcity and the cost of land in that particular area, you are bound to have these particular home prices. Again, there are financing charges not just on the end user, but also on the developer, and both of them play a particular role on the cost of that particular apartment.
Speaking of which, a developer would pay quite a bit of money to be able to develop a number of apartments in Kileleshwa, and we'll get to some of the other areas in Nairobi, including lower cost regions. But now that we are with Kileleshwa, developer pays a certain amount of money, probably in the hundreds of millions of shillings, and is paying off a construction loan or a mortgage at 181,000 shillings, or this would be something that's passed down to the consumer who buys, right? But the price of rent there is perhaps 50,000 to 60,000 shillings less than that. How do you account for that variance between 181,000 and 120,000, sometimes even 90,000 in terms of rent? How is the person who has developed or owned this home able to recover the amount of money he's sunk into this?
Okay. For the most part, and we at Shelter Afrique, and again, like I mentioned, Shelter Afrique is a Pan-African institution owned by 44 African member states, including Kenya. And we've just concluded our 34th AGM in Accra, Ghana, which we had a particular focus on what we are calling the rental concept. And Shelter Afrique is now taking a very strong Pan-African and continental role in the promotion of rental housing. And I just want to throw out a statistic. Berlin, for example, Berlin, Germany, 80% of the people who live in Berlin, one of the most modern capitals in the world, 80% are renters. The same goes with Spain, where I think there's 37% in Madrid, for example. And therefore, we wanted to see, and we are determined to see at Shelter Afrique, a way in which we can actually import a model or create a model in which rental plays a very leading role in the whole question of home ownership across Africa. But let me go back to the issue of the rental yield. A developer or a homeowner, a landlord in this regard, has a certain rental yield which they actually are looking to get out of the unit that they're actually renting out. And that particular gap, and the question you've raised, emerges not because of the differential between the mortgage rate and the rental is really at the end user level. At the developer level, the developer has developed his units, he's received project financing, which is in the odd of between 15 and 17%, with a moratorium only on interest during the construction period. And therefore, he concludes construction and sells most of the units, retaining between 10 and 20% for rental purposes.
So he's able to recover the
he's
amount
able
of
to
money
have recovered and has his target benchmark return and IRR for that development he has actually received in advance, and now is actually renting out those units in that particular market.
Okay, let's go to another statistic. Winnie, if you'll just go back to the first one, less than 1% of Kenya's working class earns above 100,000 shillings. This, of course, being from a demographic survey by Ipsos quite fairly recently. Nancy, you're in the property market, right? And with that amount of money being on the higher end, in fact, a small amount of Kenyans being able to earn this, how do people get onto the property ladder? Another statistic in relation to this is that 42% of Kenyans earn 10,000 shillings or less. How do you get onto the property market, onto the property ladder with that amount of money?
I think we need to start looking at houses outside the inner city. We find that a lot of us want to come to Kileleshwa, to Westlands, but I think we need to look at houses outside the inner city. If you look at the developed countries, people don't rent in the inner city because the houses are very small. It's a shoebox size. So the people are going out in the suburbs, and they go in, like now we should be looking at Thika, we should be looking at Machakos, we should be looking at other areas. I think what we should be talking today is how can we then live in those areas and be able to commute to Nairobi. And I think now that's where the government comes in, where the railway line must work. We must have a railway line that is efficient, that you can live in Naivasha, and in the morning you take the train and get to town. So we must stop looking at the inner city. It's too expensive. We cannot afford. We need to look outside Nairobi, and then we can live better, we can have better homes, we can have bigger homes, and we are able to afford.
All right, as the market currently stands, your tagline on your show is "There's something for everyone." Yes. Is there something indeed for everyone, considering again the amount of money that people earn per household?
Yes, we do. Actually, we have houses from 1.5 million. We have Karibu Homes, which is financed by Shelter Afrique. We have Fast Homes that you can actually afford. But the reason why people are not buying them is because people think that it's too far. Yet it's not too far. And that's why we are seeing our infrastructure is working. But once the railway line starts working and it's efficient, people will be able to live there. But yes, we do have houses that people can afford. All
right, 1.5 million shillings sounds like the sort of home that is targeted at lower people who are looking into the lower cost end of things. Again, I'll ask, who are the people who are purchasing these homes? Are there the people who are looking at those lower cost houses, or perhaps people who should be looking in the middle class range that have been priced out of the market?
I think we need to align our expectations. Once we align our expectations, if I cannot afford to live in Kileleshwa, then I will go and buy where I can afford. I think the reason we are having this issue today in Kenya is everybody wants to live in the inner city. We cannot afford to live in the inner city. Let's align our expectations. What can you afford? And we move to those areas.
All right. Maurice, let me just bring you in here. Yvonne asked a question at the beginning of the bulletin. Who are these people who are developing all of these high-rise apartments and fancy homes that don't seem, from at least the outsider's perspective, to be occupied by anybody? And to my question being, is there a bubble in the making in the real estate market?
First of all, thank you for welcoming me to the show. The first thing that I can say is that really there's been a lot of talk on the bubble itself.
Yeah.
I don't think this market will ever experience anything like a bubble. What has been there is a market correction in some areas. The reason why I'm saying that is that the Kenyan property market is very much stratified. It is so specific to the various needs of each and every income group. What tended to happen in some areas, particularly the upper middle neighborhood, given that only so many people can actually buy houses in such areas, is there was, and I think it's still there to some extent, a market correction where the prices that the asking prices of some of those properties were a bit on the higher side for that income group of individuals, and also a number of other factors. So what has tended to happen is that you will only hear of the asking price in the newspaper or in any advertisement, but you wouldn't know, the actual closing price.
Yeah.
Which has been a headache for some of us who try to do a research in these areas.
All right, let me just direct you to the Super Bowl again. The highest rise in rent rates in Nairobi, for instance, was in Embakasi, 31%. All right, is that indicative of market forces at play, or the fact that perhaps in those areas landlords are getting greedy?
I think basically from years of research in this area, what has come through is one, the Kenyan market is pro-landlord. So the renter or the buyer is at the mercy of the landlord or the owner of the building. So you can actually say to some extent that the renters and the buyers are at the mercy of the landlords. Because you see, if there was any room for negotiation, then some of these things could have been addressed.
Yeah.
If you looked at the inflation rates and the housing component of it, particularly within major urban centers, that includes Nairobi, what comes out is that probably the portion of income that people are using for the housing component is slightly on the higher side.
Yeah.
Mainly because one, the Kenyan market is property market is
it's a seller's market.
It's the seller's market. Whether you are renting or what, you are the one who is paying is at the mercy of the one he's paying to.
Kevin, this is a great place for you to jump in. A seller's market in Kenya, a seller's market especially in urban areas. What is a person supposed to do if rent keeps being raised year on year on year? An average, according to House Consult, at about 9.5 to 10%, especially in urban areas. Is there any recourse in the law for a person who experiences that?
I won't talk about the legal strictures, but I think what we really need to do this evening is to look at potential solutions.
Yeah.
And I'll go back to your statistic for Embakasi, where you have that growth in the rental.
Yeah.
And I think it's primarily a cause that Embakasi is very adjacent to the industrial area and to Mombasa Road, to the airport, and this is where jobs are actually available. From the time you had your breakfast this morning, John Allan, until this evening, 40,000 Africans have moved to an urban area. 40,000 people are moving from rural areas to urban areas.
Yes.
By 2025 in Nairobi, our population would have doubled. And therefore, this is just the beginning. Remember this date, John Allan, I told you this is just the beginning. If there's a bubble,
yes,
then we cannot really, this bubble is just the beginning of the bubble, because we have the next, I think, 10 years and the population of Nairobi will actually double.
Yeah.
As to your question of actually renting, a potential solution would be to find ways to unlock the large amounts of public land available in Nairobi and most of the 47 county, the county headquarters, unlock this public land through joint ventures and public-private partnerships in order to actually have an available housing stock which we can then offer the people.
Let's speak about that, because the NHC develops about, what, 50,000 homes a year, or at least that should be the target. Where is the shortfall according to what you've seen?
The housing deficit, as estimated, is about 150,000 units per annum. And there have been several studies around this, and we believe that is largely accurate. But you don't want to be Nigeria, where the housing deficit is 40 million. units. In Kenya, our 150,000 units per annum is really a cause of the factors of urbanization, a lack of infrastructure and planning, and most importantly, affordable housing finance that can actually go with that. We could start with the issue of financing as a latter issue. Presently, you have said the mortgage rate is around 10.9, but averagely, I think it's 17%. The bank rates that we have in Kenya are a factor of the risk-free rate, which is the 90-day treasury bill, which I think now is around 11.9%.
Yeah.
Therefore, it is inconceivable that we will have a single-digit interest rate around mortgages in Kenya when the government of Kenya and the National Treasury is actually borrowing from the market at double-digit. It's not going to happen. Number two, on the issue of housing. Housing is a devolved function under our constitution.
Yes.
And therefore, for infrastructure, for example, one of the big roles that our governors could actually drive in order to have a legacy would be for them to come up with affordable housing estates in our counties in order to serve the rapidly rising urban population. And we're not just talking about Nairobi, we talk about Mombasa, Kisumu,
and
Eldoret,
across the country.
and Nakuru. Yes.
Now, Nancy, you speak to a lot of developers on your show, and of course using your real estate company. What are developers saying about the barriers to developing not just any sorts of housing, but low-cost housing for the masses of people who are moving into urban areas?
I think the number one is the cost of land. The cost of land in Kenya is very expensive. And I'd like to echo Kevin, that we now need the government and the county government to release some land into partnership, PPPs, and joint ventures. And secondly, we are finding some institutions are holding a lot of land, and even some speculators are also holding some large land banks, and we are also finding a lot of other people who just have large trunks of land and they don't sell. And you'll find some areas, there are some areas in Kenya, land is never sold. So if we release that land and it will be affordable, we'll have joint ventures, and the county governments and the government will also provide infrastructure, because infrastructure is very expensive. And every developer who starts any development and they have to put in infrastructure, you find it gets very expensive, and that's what drives the property price to go high.
Okay, Maurice, regulation or incentive, here the role being of the county government in order to spur that housing boom and development. What do you think should happen? Because right now people are complaining about high rent, but that is a factor, as Kevin has explained, of urbanization. So do we regulate against the landlord, or do we inspire the developer to develop more houses?
Actually, I think the latter answers is more of a solution to the issue, because one, being a free economy, a liberalized economy, anything on controls will basically backfire. The idea here is, after addressing all the issues of trying to get sources of long-term financing, trying to address the issues of land, is one, look for a way to create more incentives to the developers. One of the biggest issues that has been there is the issue of idle land, like has been said, and speculation along those lines. There was a proposal sometime a while back to actually tax some of this idle land, that because you see, if for land to appreciate in any area, what tends to happen is that maybe the next person has come and built, the next person has come and built, and the land that is there automatically appreciates because of the initiatives of these other the investors who've come through to that area. Now, for the individual who is there, because land in itself does not really have any value, the individual who is there owe it to these other developers in a way that he also participates, builds or does something about it, so that generally there's development. Now, if something like that doesn't happen, then probably a proposal will be, why don't you tax some of this idle land and see how, if people can sell that or can even give out for development.
For development. Now, we've donated quite a bit of our time to speaking about developers and the shortage in terms of hardcore elements of being able to resolve this crisis. But at the end of the day, houses are occupied by people. people, right? And let's speak about some of the unfortunate incidents that we've seen, houses collapsing, and pointing to a lack in terms of quality. Nancy, I'll come to you for this. Why isn't there perhaps even stronger regulation with respect to quality in terms of housing? A lot of people walk into these many fancy looking apartments from the outside but wind up disappointed by what they find in the inside.
To be honest, I think that we as Kenyans must be responsible, and we must, before you rent out a house or even buy a house, double check. We are telling people, engage professionals. If you get a valuer, actually, when they go on site, they do come back and tell you, this house, these are the pros and these are the cons. We need to take responsibility ourselves and refuse certain houses. You're finding a lot of the houses that are collapsing. Even the contractors who are on site, even the masonry, they are telling you, hii nyumba iko na shida. But we still go ahead and rent it out.
All right.
So we need to take that responsibility. Whilst MCA is taking their responsibility, the county government is taking their responsibility, but there also must be some penalties for developers who are doing shoddy jobs. All
right. Let's speak about value and in terms of quality as a pillar. Kevin, we spoke about this prior to this evening's conversation. How big of a factor should be valuation when looking at the pricing of an apartment, the pricing of a house? Understandably, a lot of people have invested a lot of money in being able to develop these, but like I said, at the end of the day, it is people who will occupy these houses.
Okay. In October 2013, one of our partners, the McKinsey Global Institute, released a report on housing affordability globally. And they came up with what were the 4 principal drivers for housing affordability. And that was the land aspect, the finance charges, and then in particular housing, what they call asset management, which was really the maintenance of the actual units. A big part of this, and within the report, was how houses are actually constructed, and which was the 4th pillar. Houses in Kenya are actually constructed with very old traditional methods of construction. What we need to do and introduce in particular is modern methods of construction. And Shelter Afrique has been looking to support several of the new players who are coming into the market with modern methods of construction and project management. I'd like to mention 2, Koto Homes, which is a partner of Nancy's, and also CEMEX, which is a project coming very soon in October, which is going to actually develop modern methods of construction using enhanced polystyrene systems. But I'll talk about housing maintenance and quality, because this is something which culturally we are not very attuned to actually doing. A house that is well maintained will fetch higher rent. A house that is not well maintained and not well constructed may fetch lower rent. And therefore it goes at John Allen to actually saying that people will actually look for housing units which they can afford based on issues of quality generally, and the landlord actually knows that. So this is the bargain that actually goes into the relationship between the landlord and the tenant and the actual unit that they're actually getting to rent. As to whether this can be regulated, it is very difficult given those factors of urbanization that are actually coming. What is actually needed is a market side intervention in having proper and a well-regulated property management industry. We have the Kenya Property Developers Association for developers, but we don't really have something for estate agents
and property
managers. And this is something which I believe would come, and there will be a self-regulating standard around that.
Okay, Maurice, I'll give you the last word as time has run short this evening. Will there ever be a point in the Kenyan situation that it reverts to, or rather turns into a buyer's market, or is at least a little more equal in favor of the buyer or the renter in Kenya?
I think that should be a long time to come, given the very realities that are there now, particularly the effects of urbanization and each and every individual trying to see how one even get a place to rent that is affordable. Having a market that is almost equal, fair, I think it's work in progress on a daily basis, through regulations, through incentives for having, funding, interest rates coming down, long-term funding, innovative ways, technology, and all these other things that can assist in bringing down in actually bringing down the cost of houses in the country. Okay. Affordability is still a very big issue. It is very relative how people define affordability itself, because what might sound affordable to one sector of the society is totally on the other side of the other part of the society. So it's going to take a long time.
All right, Maurice, that's where we'll leave it. Maurice Aaron, business writer and economist. Nancy Muthoni, host of the property show and real estate agent herself, as well as Kevin Kihara from Shelter Afrique. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, are you living to rent, or are you renting and living comfortably? That's a question, an existential one, in Nairobi and in different urban parts of the Republic of Kenya. What is going to be happening with respect to the property market in coming days could very well change with new developments in terms of regulation and legislation to help developers give people more affordable housing, and perhaps also get people who are on the end, the very end of this chain, to get involved in looking at terms of quality. But of course, the conversations that we have these evenings on KTN Weekend Prime always have a point, and Yvon has been following this conversation. Yvon, what is the point from tonight's conversation on living to rent?
All right, now you've seen the figures and statistics that have come out of the discussion tonight, that the highest rent increase has been in Embakasi at 31%, while the average increase is supposed to be about 9 to 10% every year. This is according to the Has Consult Index. While some of you on social media think this is good news for those that want to invest in Embakasi, the real issue here is that rent is increasing at an ever higher rate. And the question we need to ask ourselves tonight is, should the property markets be regulated, or should they be left to market forces to sort of take a look at what the prices should be? And this is a question we're asking today when we take a look at the ever increasing prices in the property market. Should the forces be allowed to do that, or should we step in? And that is why the Rent Tribunal is there, though not for every type of housing. The Rent Tribunal has been there to regulate the price of low-cost housing. The second question we're asking tonight is, should the Rent Tribunal then be allowed to expand its mandate so that it's not only looking at low-cost housing, but then taking a look at rent across the various strata of the economy? And finally, we take a look at what's happening with the housing bill tonight. Now, as we all know, the National Housing Corporation is responsible for building low-cost housing in the country. They're supposed to be building 150,000 units a year. They're doing about 50,000 units, and that means there's a great big deficit. Now, they do this by investing in low-cost building materials, and private developers ideally should be helping the National Housing Corporation in doing this. But has the government put in place economic measures at least to guarantee developers returns on their investment, and also to guarantee that mortgages from banks have lower interest rates that then allows more and more people into the mortgage bracket and therefore into home ownership? The housing bill might just be the one that provides solutions to this. Keep your comments coming in as we take a look at our hashtag tonight, Living for Rent.